As you guys are logging on today, again, we welcome you to the SJSU Words to Action, our institute for the study of sport, society, and social change. If you'd like to link in and learn more about the institute and San Jose State University, we welcome you to explore our website at www.sjsuwordstoaction.com. You can find us on Facebook, and you can also find us on Twitter. Thank you again for joining. So greetings everyone, and welcome to the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change, and our digital platform where we're talking about sport conversations for social change. Today's conversation is one of the last in our series of conversations that discuss the state of sport in a time of COVID-19. So we encourage you again to review our past sport conversations and join our efforts to move forward and move from words to action. I am the director of the Institute. My name is Akila Carter-Francique. And again, we're here coming to you from San Jose State University. So just to give you a little backstory about the Institute, if you don't already know, the Institute was created in 2017 with the goal to honor SJSU legacy and continue the dialogue about athlete activism and the influence of sport and effective in supporting positive change. As our nation confronts and explores deeply complex social issues, it is critical that we continue to challenge the boundaries of sport and activism. Sport offers the occasion to pose big questions, not just of athletes, but also of ourselves, and provide enlightening perspectives. Thus, the mission of the Institute is that we're dedicated to research, analysis, and education at the intersection of sport and society. So again, to learn more about our Institute, please visit us at SJSU Words to Action. So over the next hour, our conversation, we are going to speak on teaching in a virtual space during COVID-19. This week's conversation will reflect upon the efforts of virtual, online, or remote teaching of sport during COVID-19. Our conversation will focus on the issues and challenges of transitioning to a virtual platform. It will explore the ways to teach sport and its multiple range of courses, from theory-based courses to practical-based courses for a diverse group of learners, and provide some best practices and teaching tips for success as we continue to educate our students of today and tomorrow. So if you would like to share your story, if you have questions that you'd like to ask us, I encourage you to use our chat box as we go through this discussion. But first, want to know who's in the audience today. So feel free, we're going to put a poll up. Let us know who you are so our wonderful speakers will know who you are. So as we introduce everybody today, again, like I said, feel free to give that information. And I want to share with you a few of these amazing people that we have online. First up, if you will, Dr. Courtney Flowers. She is an associate professor of sport management at Texas Southern University, a specialist on building cultures of inclusion in sport. Her research interests address systemic and culturally based forms of bias and prejudice. Courtney also serves as a faculty affiliate for the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change. Next, we have Dr. Brian Gearity. He's a director and professor of the Master of Arts in Sport Coaching and several online graduate certificate programs at the University of Denver. He's both published by Routledge in 2020. He co-edited the book, Coach Education and Development in Sport Instructional Strategies, and co-authored Understanding Strength and Conditioning as Sport Coaching, Bridging the Biophysical, Pedagogical, and Sociocultural Foundations of Practice. Brian also serves as a faculty affiliate for our Institute. Next up, we have Dr. Jasmine Hamilton. She's currently an assistant professor in health and kinesiology in the Health and Kinesiology Department at Prairie A&M University. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses and is a member of the Faculty Senate. She is also conducts assessment for the department, the College of Education, and accreditation for Prairie A&M. Her research interests include sociocultural issues, social identity, and social capital within physical activity, sport, and physical education. And just as an aside, prior to working in higher education, she taught at the high school science courses in Texas and Louisiana as a certified teacher. She also coached high school athletics and is a USATF Level 1 track and field coach for the Northwest Flyers. A little shout out. Last and certainly not least, we have Dr. Eli Wolff. He is the director of Power of Sport Lab, a platform to fuel and magnify creativity, diversity, connection, and leadership through sport. Eli is also an instructor with the sport management program at the University of Connecticut, and he is a co-founder and advisor to the Sport and Society Initiative at Brown University. Eli's work has been at the intersection of research, education, and advocacy in and through sport, with a focus on sport and social justice, diversity, disability, and inclusion. Eli has co-founded Disability in Sport International, Athletes for Human Rights, the Olympism Project, and Mentoring for Change. And Eli, too, serves as one of our faculty affiliates for the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change. So welcome each and every one of you all today. Glad to have you. So let me get started here. Had to read all of that information. I wanted to first send my little shout out. Let me put my headband on here and congratulate all of our graduates. I know that, yes, a hand clap for all of that. You guys have been amazing students through this year. I think each of us thanks all of you for not only learning through us these past 4 to 5 years, but also surviving and making it through this COVID-19 period. I'd also like to send a special congratulations with a few young women that worked with the Institute this year, my first year, and so I'm so grateful for them. First is Asia Adams. She's a senior. She was a double major in African American Studies as well as sociology. So she served as my intern. She has just been amazing. So I thank her for all that she's done and want to definitely celebrate her. And then I had 2 lovely women from our swimming and diving teams that found me and decided to work with the Institute and help with supporting programs that we conducted at Heritage Home with women's empowerment, as well as serving as speakers for a Martin Luther King Jr. celebration at our San Jose State Library. And that's Jacqueline. Her nickname is Jax Nison. She's a senior. She's a double major as well in environmental studies and psychology. And then we have Malia Schmidt, who's a senior. Her major was sociology, and she minored in women's studies. So I want to, again, thank each and every one of them and wish them all the best as they continue their education and life journey. Any guys want to send a shout out?
Sure, I'll just shout out all the graduates from Prairie View A&M University, especially the ones in health and kinesiology. So yeah, congratulations to all of them.
Anybody else? We're good? I think we're still in shock. We're still entering grades. We're still going through all of that. But I think many commencements are coming up and we saw a lot of things online happening. So definitely want to support them. Wanted to see, what was our poll real quick? How many people do we have on the call today? Some faculty, we got coaches, athletes, students, and others. So we've got a good number of people that are waiting to hear from us today. So we'll get right into it. Get my little headphones off. So one of my first questions that I want to ask and that I try to ask of all my guests is, what does sport mean to you? Dr. Courtney, what does sport mean to you?
Sport has kind of morphed for me, beginning my career as on the elementary school level, all the way to now being a professor. Sport, in its essence, to me, is a vehicle for change. It's a vehicle for inclusion. I look at it holistically because across, I mean, especially right now dealing with what we're being impacted with COVID-19, we see that sport is being used as the great divider to kind of bring us all together. It allows us to have one unified voice. Obviously, I'm speaking from cultural and diversity perspective on that. You know, it allows us to kind of find some similarities in discussion. But outside of it, when I go back to the athlete, sport gave me that confidence, that builder of leadership, that responsibility, the effort to really understand how to develop myself, things like time management, things like balance, work-life balance, really understanding, you know, where I fit in on a team, what a team was. And so in essence, it is pretty much that vessel that, you know, brings everything together. One of the things that I say in my class with my students is no matter what you want to do, sport is so versatile. You can go and work for FedEx and keep your sports degree because there's a sports component in FedEx. We're kind of like, if you go back to drumline, it's that one beat, one sound sort of thing. And so it's that microcosm that in a world of chaos, which is what we're in now, sport is that vehicle that can bring us together.
Okay. Brian, what does sport mean to you?
So we're like trying to do like a definition of something being like a post-structural, postmodern, you know, kind of researcher, scholar. Do I begin like it's a discursive construction? And I just, you know, that's the end of it.
Okay.
Right, because I mean, and I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic about the, you know, things like, for example, Courtney just talked about, but sport also brings people down. It divides people. It results in inequalities and equities, you know, various forms of ism too.
Okay.
So one of the things that, like, for add some insight would be just to compare sport to playing games. I think that's probably a pretty interesting comparison when you look at the history of all of those things and how they've been formed over the years. And we can do the same activity like playing football, right? And even right there, I just said playing football. Playing football is not the same as being a professional athlete or a Division I athlete, or I was a Division III athlete, high school. So people doing the same things with wildly different meanings, purposes, training practices. So putting my finger on something would be like a no-no, but that would be like a one interesting, I think, comparison to look at sport versus those things to try to kind of get at the essence of what it kind of has been and how it's changed.
Okay. Dr. Jasmine, what does sport mean to you? You don't have to unmute real quick for us so we can hear all that.
There we go. I had earlier. But Dr. Flowers said a lot of the things that I was going to say too, is sport was being a medium for change. But the other things for me too, is being a former athlete and then now studying sport, is that it's still kind of that safe haven for me. You know, anything and everything happens, you know, within the realm of sport. And the scientific part of me is just that it's where kind of nature versus nurture comes to meet and play together. And, you know, you see all just the different combinations, and anything and everything is possible. And I think that's also other thing too, which makes sports such a place for hope, you know. So even if your team is losing like 56-2, of the Falcons, throwing that out there, 28-3. You know,
wow, okay.
I'm by the way, but you still, you know, there's still that hope, that belief that's there. And then the final thing for me is just that whole essence of teamwork. And I've noticed how that has morphed even into, you know, my job today, which is related to sport, but, you know, being a faculty member, you're still part of a team. Right. And so seeing too how our department, you know, works within that, because most of us were former athletes, and looking at other places when most of them weren't former athletes, and just, you know, that whole idea of teamwork. As they say, teamwork makes the dream work. So,
okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And Eli, what does sport mean to you?
Well, sport is just a very powerful vehicle. You know, it has a lot of potential, like, in terms of how it can be used, but in many ways to kind of see the really positive sides of how sport can be transformational. It can really connect people, you know, bring people together, but it also can be used for resilience and be used as a source for innovation. You know, see a lot of solidarity coming through sport. And so I think a lot of the lessons that can be learned, has the potential to be learned through sport, are those same lessons that we can be applied to even our our current situation. I mean, for me, I was able to, compete in the Olympics. And so that experience of being in 2 Olympic Games is obviously very powerful, transformational. And then now, working, doing a lot of the United Nations work on support for development and peace and human rights, you just see kind of the broadness of sport and how the places in the world and universe that it touches, and you just kind of see it, and it's very powerful. So that's kind of been my experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm actually going to throw a question right back at you, and kind of a double question of, how are you doing? What courses were you currently teaching right now as we go in sort of this COVID state? What courses were you teaching, and how are you making it? Again, we're at home and some of us are parents.
Yeah.
How's it going for you?
That's good. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's sort of this hectic transitional time, a lot going on, both in terms of the roles I have for teaching, advising, as well as just my own. I have 2 young, I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, so that's hectic. But yeah, the teaching, the transition, I teach at UConn. I taught an international sport and social justice class. And then I also do some teaching and advising at Brown University as well, more just broader sport society, social innovation, social impact, and just kind of, journey with the students, to kind of, we're all in it together, trying to figure it out, adjust, adapt, kind of applying some of my own kind of, as a person with a disability, adapting to different environments. So just applying various skill sets to figuring it out, and just kind of going with the flow and doing our best and trying to support each other.
Right. Dr. Hamilton, can you tell us a little bit, again, how are you doing? And what has this time transition been like for you?
So at this moment, I'm a lot better because we finished our semester, grades and all that stuff. So now it's just the advisement. Oh, yay. So that was just the advisement part of it. But the course that I teach was applied anatomy and kinesiology. And we had a lab component. And so it's kind of hard to talk about blood pressure. You don't have, them that's right there and understanding everything that goes on from a cardiovascular standpoint. So the same thing as Dr. Wolff stated, like I was, telling them because they were like, we didn't want to do an online class. And I said, well, if you look at the syllabus, this class wasn't designed to be online either. So it's, both of us working together. And I think once the students understood that we aren't just faculty members aren't just these people that just, sit in our little holes and just wait until, a student comes along so we can do whatever for them, that we actually had our own lives too. And I think that helped to ease the tension as well. Actually, I just earlier today received my faculty evaluation from the students. And one of the responses were, thank you for not overloading us with assignments, just because it went online. And so I really, appreciated that. And I tell them, one thing I expressed to them was that I don't care about your grades. I know grades are important, so I care in that aspect. But what I really want for you to understand is to get what you're supposed to get from this class. Right. And so that helps. I mean, there were a lot of challenges logging on. A quick funny story and we'll move on. I even had a student, because I opened up Instagram accounts. I also have another way of letting students feel comfortable, with contacting me. So a lot of them joined and was like, oh, will you follow me back? I said, yeah, sure. But one of them went live on Instagram cooking chicken while she was in the Zoom class with me. Of course, the notification came up and I was like, aren't we talking about stuff in class today? So that was really funny, but it's been a lot. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, Brian, again, how are you doing? And then what kind of chicken? What kind of chicken?
It was, I don't know what kind of chicken she was making, but she was at the point of washing the chicken before she actually started to season it. Okay, so she was just at the beginning of her process, I guess, trying to show everybody else how to cook chicken, but.
Food Network, here we come. Okay. So with that said, Brian, how are you doing? And what support did you receive in sort of making that and responding to the transition for you and your students? And obviously you're in a director role. So did you receive some support from above you, if you will? Or did you begin to sort of go fact find and find some resources to help your instructors and students make that transition?
Yeah. So the weird part, right? I've been teaching online now for 11 years. And when I came to Denver in 2014, it was to start a fully online master's degree. So our program has been online, fully online since 2014, and
Yeah.
we've been asynchronous online. So, you know, and I taught in person for years still, occasionally still do that, but there was no transition really for us in our delivery. The transition was, for example, tonight, I'll give a shout out then to Dr. Clayton Kucklick, who's on the call. We're doing our second student social hour tonight at 5:30 p.m. And we haven't done it before, and it's kind of right in response to checking in on students' psychological, emotional well-being. The instructional materials that we develop, video, you know, and he teaches the kinesiology class and biomechanics class online too. So we have some software programs, we find apps, tools, but you also like you design the class to fit what you have available as well. So you have good alignment from, you know, what you're trying to kind of get done explicitly to the instructional materials, to the evaluation, and those things fit. Now, I will say I just got off of a different Zoom call with our other faculty administrators, and people are struggling because, you know, people are really struggling because they don't understand the time, the resources, the technology problems, the software systems, the storage on your devices, trying to make a video, and you got kids running around and noises and the dog barks and the Air Force flies over. So, you know, trying to think through all those things and develop a checklist and develop a timeline, figuring out what's important now, how to invest your time. And then we just, with Dr. K, we just updated we just divided it into planning. So like pre-class, during the class, and post-class. And we developed about a 3-page checklist with hyperlinks and various things that we have to do specifically for accreditation and other stuff. So we can just bring our people on and we can work with all of our other instructors as a before, during, and after kind of model. And that seems to work, and it's not overwhelming enough too, because some of these folks, you know, they cognitive overload, you know, they just like, oh, here's all these resources. And you're like, I ain't got time to look at all this stuff and make sense of this.
Definitely. So, and we're going to get into those nuts and bolts of it with regards to methods, strategy, sort of application, and assessment as we go throughout today's program. So I'm going to move ahead a little bit. And one of the things I wanted to get at in sort of transitioning online was, yes, the instruction for those faculty, but to Eli real quick, how did you help some of the students cope with the transition when we talk about socially and emotionally? And if Courtney, you can add a brief nugget in there as well. Just share with us, because we do understand that the mental health is a big component of our students. And also just giving a quick aside to our show that we had a couple weeks ago regarding HBCUs and some of the technological challenges with some students moving home, and from a systemic standpoint, structural standpoint, from our society, not having access to broadband and things of that nature. So socially, emotionally, technologically, can you guys briefly just give us some insight before we roll into our methods about how you help those students cope through that transition?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of a big part of it for me in terms of the group of students that I have, particularly in the classroom, but also in terms of advising and just being supportive, you know, being really able to share empathy, giving my phone number, you know, being able to say, reach out at any time, but also in terms of just adapting a little bit to like a little more flexible in terms of, you know, like Jasmine had just said about, you know, it's more about the understanding of the content and getting it rather than like necessarily finishing everything right away. Or so it's just able to be a little more flexible on like pushing some deadlines back. Also, I adapted some group to, you know, kind of just allow them to be a little more flexible on how they got some of the work done. But I think the most important thing was just to recognize them as individual students and their lives and the transitions and the technology and all that they're going through. And also for them to realize that for me too, you know, it's kind of opening up the door of them seeing, I mean, that's always a part of me sharing my life a little bit, but also for them to see that, you know, I have two young kids, like things are chaotic. They may get Stella coming in, you know, in back here any minute. So part of it's just the realness of it, the authenticity of this whole experience, but to have that empathy there, I think is really important.
Thank you for sharing that and chiming in. I did the same thing with my students, and just we would spend the first 20, 30 minutes of just how are you doing, which allowed me to understand, you know, their home life or what structure they were having to manage. But they also got to see mine as I was Zoom bombed by my children. So coming in, my son just loves to see everybody. So it just took that moment for him to say hi. So, and being understanding with that. Courtney, I know you have a young one as well.
Yes. It was a couple things that were very challenging. Number one, having a first grader and having a first grade teacher that was very open with me and sharing, you know, hey, I have 24 kids in this class. Some of them have technology. Some of their parents, you know, are Spanish speaking. And so this is going to be a challenge for me. And so realize that, you know, I know you've been, you know, I have a very good relationship with my daughter's teacher, you know, so she really reached out to me and was like, hey, how are you doing this? So that was awesome to be able to share, because like similar to Brian, I've been online teaching since '09. So a couple years in the game. In some respects, I'm more comfortable in an online setting versus the face-to-face. So this is kind of my thing. For our students, I teach graduate classes in our sports studies, sports leadership program. And so our students had already signed up for our online program. So we didn't really foresee any challenges. What was unique with us is that over 80%, I would go as far as to say 85% of our students are in the field of sports. And so we had a number of students that didn't have computers, because why buy a computer? Why have technology? And the Houston Rockets are providing you this office with all of this technology, and I'm never going to be able to afford a computer that has that many applications. Right. So we had a number of kids that were like, I don't own a laptop because I do all my work at work, you know. And the other side of it was having those students, of course, having sports shut down March 12th, and realizing that, oh gosh, I'm under fire at work because now I have to put all of my projects now online. And so one of the things that we did in our program, and I'll pick on one of my students because she doesn't mind sharing the story, I've already asked her, is that she had to build some sort of internship program to provide for her students, understanding that they didn't know when sports was going to open up, but when sports opened up, they had to have some social distancing practices and policies in place. And so I allowed her to use that project as a class assignment because it went hand in hand with the athletic administration class. Right. She already had a final project that was very similar, so it was very easy for me to allow her to be able to morph that assignment for class into the project that she had for work. And then allowing her the opportunity to share that final project with the class was a win-win for us. The other thing that we did was we picked up the phone and we called these kids. A lot of my students were also moms, dads, siblings. And so just being able to talk to them and really understand the mental side of it, because if you didn't have them mentally, they weren't going to complete the assignments. Right. So another thing that I did as a mom, again, I had I called one of my students one day and she was like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do it. I can't. And I was like, well, you can't quit because you're a mom. We have to go on. And so she asked me, she was like, well, what are some of the things that Skylar are doing in class? Her daughter was also a first grader as my daughter, Skylar. And I said, well, why don't I just upload the stuff that I'm doing with Skylar into our Blackboard classroom? Okay. And so one of the things that I did was I built a folder for those kids to complete assignments as their parents were completing assignments. So it was kind of collective. The kids complete the assignment and the parent completes the assignment. And it was so cute. One of the kids actually was happy to receive assignments. So I found some, you know, some virtual stickers and stuff to put on her assignment, and she was completing more stuff than her mom. But again, you know, realizing that, you know, these parents are now at home, they're locked down in their space, and they need someone to watch, babysit their kids as they're doing their assignments. And so having that time where we're going to do this together for Dr. Flowers, and you're going to upload your stuff in the Blackboard too, has been one of the things that, you know, really the students said that they appreciated. It was outside of the box for me, something that I didn't foresee doing this when I first signed up for the class. But again, you have to make those changes. You know, you have to make those changes, and that all happened via picking up the phone and calling.
Well, that's great. You know, and that kind of takes us into our next segment of really getting into and honing in on this notion of teaching methods, strategies, application, and assessment. And so with all of that said, you know, one of the things that we talk about from our teaching is those teaching methods, and sort of this technology versus teachers / student centered with this graphic I have here. And I think we sort of fight amongst that, but now we're having to, as Brian suggested, rely on a lot of this technology. And so with that said, each and every one of you we know has taught online. You teach a range of subjects. Talk to us a little bit about some of the adjustments, modifications you may have made to your courses in regards to sort of the teaching method and really helping us understand sort of that purpose or understanding the teaching methodology from that perspective. So Dr. Hamilton, can you lead us off, or start us off, if you will, in a little conversation on teaching methods?
Sure. One of the, I guess, biggest challenges for me with my undergraduate course, because graduate was fairly easy to put online. But actually, I will say with my graduate course, it was teaching physical education. And so one thing is that I saw a lot of people putting up things up like, oh, we're gonna have physical education in today, but I was like, that's not true physical education. You got physical activity, but not physically, we're physically educated. So I had my students create mini lesson plans, and that would ended up being like their final project, and mini lesson plans on every level. So it's something that you're doing an activity, you're actually being educated as to why you're doing the activity. And so I think that made it a lot easier too, because I had students that also had kids or nieces and nephews, and so that helped them out and had them actually participate. With the undergraduate course, I had labs, and so I had to figure out how to change those labs and get them the same information that they would actually get from the labs. And so I ended up changing it to the quizzes, but the quizzes really focused on the cognitive aspect of it. So what were they supposed to get or understand from comparing how many push-ups someone did with their muscular fitness and strength and so on. And so that was one way of changing that. But I was able to rely on a lot of things that I learned on my K-12 training. And so it's understanding the link between curriculum instruction, learning, and so on. And I know that was another kind of hurdle for many friends and colleagues that I have that are faculty members, because all of this is a lot. And each one of these, you have curriculum methods, styles, and so on. Same thing with instruction. There's instructional design, styles, techniques, same thing with learning. And so it's kind of, I look at everything like a recipe. Every time I cook, I kind of make up my own whatever I want to add. So like example, if you like curry, if you don't like curry, and then you can, switch it out and put whatever else in it. So that's kind of the same way I look at applying all of these learning theories and so on. It's just you finding what you want to look at, and then how does it work for you? What you see on the screen is currently a type of instructional design model. It's known as the 5E model. Hence, there's 5 words that begin with E, but they all kind of at different levels engage students. I like this one too, because it actually brings in differentiated learning. It can be inquiry-based, a lot of the things that we saw in the previous slide. And so these are ways to kind of look at and see how you can engage your students, especially with this new virtual learning environment. Just choose any one of them, like engage, explore, so on. It's really easy to explore. Just give them a topic and ask them like, hey, what do you find out about this? You're incorporating technology, you're incorporating it being student-centered. There's a lot of things that you can use with any aspects of this. I know on the K-12 level, they have to hit every single one of these aspects with their learning, with their lesson plans. But it's something that has helped me to look at as well. So if I didn't have enough explanation, maybe I'll go back to explaining. And how does explaining work with evaluation? How does that work with collaboration? So it's a lot. And I don't want to overload you all with a lot of things too, as Brian said earlier, the cognitive overload. And I don't want to do that at all. But it's just kind of reducing it down to what can you choose and what actually works for you.
Okay, thank you. One of the other components that we talk about in sort of just thinking about curriculum, instruction, and learning is also understanding who our learners are. And I know, for many of us from an in-class perspective, we sort of work with our students. But again, we teach theory and we teach from that practitioner side of things. One of the things that we were talking about sort of as a group before this program was just the whole notion of how do your students best learn. One that I adopted and used in the class when I taught motor learning and control at Prairie View A&M University was the VARC and incorporating that VARC analysis. So are your students visual, oral, do they read, are they kinesthetic and tactile, to know how to sort of create assignments. And this gives us a little information and it's sort of leading into our teaching strategies. But have any of you all utilized sort of this type notion when we talk about the VARC with your classes and sort of understanding your learners?
So I've used it from more of a differentiated learning standpoint. I know I'm a visual learner myself. And so since I understand about that self, then I know that most of the teaching that when I'm in a classroom, and even when I was online, was showing them the visuals. But I also understand that many of the students don't, you know, some of them hear it better, or if they read it, or if they're actually, you know, touching or moving things around with it. So anything that I design, I always think about those different learning styles, and also to different understanding levels as well. So that's one way that I have with everything, really, just from planning the courses to looking at the assignments and so on.
And I think it's a great tool. You know, I've actually, like I said, I use the tool for my students. What I like about the VARC is that you have an opportunity to go onto this website here, take a quick quiz, have the students see where their learning styles are, but you as an instructor can do the same. So I actually shared that exchange with them. And just recently in the Francique Academy of Student Learners, used this same VARC on my daughter to see what her learning style was and how she was picking up information. Interesting enough, I found that she's mixed modal. So she's all of them, heavily visual, a little bit, you know, more kinesthetic, but she absorbs all of this. And so I think, again, as we are talking about teaching strategies, and we'll go into sort of that next slide and that next area, that's something that really kind of comes to life for you all as you sort of construct your courses and finding those different materials to engage your students to come and meet you virtually. So with that said, and talking about some of those things, Brian, could you share a little bit about how did you transition? I know you did, like I said, you teach online, but do you have some additional advice for those that taught face-to-face classes, particularly in your field of coaching education, into bringing it online to make it just as sort of user-friendly, if you will, and engaging for those learners?
So I'm laughing too, because if you guys have paid any attention to like my body and face during the call already, my daughter came in and took paper out of my office. My son just called on FaceTime to tell me that he caught a couple of fish down at the reservoir. You know, and then my wife actually came by the front door too. So she came, it was, is that Liam? You know, so you just get used to it. You know, and I just say that in part, it's kind of like with the newscaster when the kid walks in the background too. The reality is nobody cares. You know, it's funny, and right? Like we all retweet and like, you know, when the professor's in the classroom holding the baby or something like that happens. So reducing like this distance and like the you know, the sage on the stage type of thing is probably a useful thing. I digress. All right. So to get to that, I took a note here. I think one of the strategies too is just good instruction. Like Jasmine was talking about differentiated learning. When you were talking about other instructional strategies and tactics, I started thinking about universal design for learning. UDL is another kind of popular buzzword in the online circles. And you want to try to find multiple ways to reach the learner, right? They take sometimes, right? We have to remember learning, like life and everything and growing, is a process. It just doesn't necessarily happen. You know, it can be an epiphany, but the epiphany usually takes time. So skill development, all those things take time, and you find that to utilize a variety of resources, and you'll find some things that generally work. So having good instructional plan from, again, objectives to learning materials and then assessment. I like the slides you had kind of had that alignment between it. I would say moving things online as well, right? Like shorter videos are better, right? That's one of the biggest mistakes I made early on too, is nobody wants to, first of all, nobody wants to hear you talk and lecture at them, usually for hours at a time anyway. But putting that online And assuming that people are watching and retaining anything or growing at all is like, no. So keep all that stuff short. And different
so what are you
ways.
thinking? You're saying about 10 to 15 minutes?
Yeah, man. I mean, nowadays, the recommendations have gone from like that 10 to 12-minute tops down to 3 to 5.
3 to 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
keeping it just short. Some of the fancier stuff in videos, right? You can tag it, you can bookmark it, you can have ways that are smaller that they can click on it to go to a specific point. You can have a quiz embedded in it, and those are really advanced tools. But I think most folks too, if they're going to go online or thinking about this fall, think about I call it the base model, the foundation. Your syllabus, your objectives, your assessment, and then what are you going to do to get them from kind of point A to point B?
Okay.
So it's referred in the literature as just backwards by design.
Okay.
So in that backwards by design, and then basic video creation, like we've got a chapter in that book about online learning and basic stuff, where audiovisual quality, you can see like my office, and this is actually a whiteboard. I got a screen, various tools, and this is an external camera, and I've got 3 computer screens. So our support and resources are also designed to be online, digital, and kind of technology enhanced. Just like students have in the internet access, if faculty don't have access to resources, don't tell them to teach their class online and this and that. I mean, you gotta provide the resources just like you do the physical buildings too.
And I'm glad you said that. At San Jose, in our California state system, which I'm a part of, we have decided to be virtual for the fall semester. So we're taking that time, and I'm glad to say SJSU has taken steps to provide opportunities for all of our faculty to get that online training and get that quality matters training as well, and get that certification. So we're better in tune with our respective platforms. And again, I've had the training before at my previous institution, but still familiarizing myself with SJSU and all of its capabilities. So I say to each of you out there, if you please engage with your Centers for Teaching and Learning and see what opportunities they have available to you. Talk to your department heads, communicate with your dean, and kind of figure out what resources do we have at our fingertips that we can begin to use. Eli, I go to you, and sort of talking about in these sort of strategies, are you one that talks about synchronous, asynchronous? What seems to work well? Because again, we have theory classes, we have practitioner classes. So how do those seem to work best for you?
I've had a little bit of a combination of both. The classes that I've taught, the one that in the transition from in the time, I ended up the students, part of it was to really engage with them and get a sense of their comfort and their needs. And they did share with me that, they just couldn't stand, because it was a 2.5-hour class.
Ooh,
So they said that just wasn't going to work. So we dropped the time down to about an hour of actual face-to-face time. And it was a smaller class, so only about 10 students. But it was still nice to have that time to engage on the weekly. But then in the time beyond that, it was more kind of just staying in touch and the more contact and going back to the different learning styles. I think that's really important, because part of it also in this transition was really getting to know the students a little bit better, getting to know kind of how, especially with these new conditions and with these new environments, getting a sense from them, kind of what would they need more, and it kind of opened up the dialogue in that way. But in terms of the actual teaching methods and the way that I was, kind of delivering information or creating PowerPoints or resources or having them do, my courses tend to be pretty research-based, so case studies and having them do engaged scholarship and coming back. So, some of that stuff was fairly similar to in-person to online, but there was some differences just in terms of kind of them getting more comfortable, helping them think through kind of how they could engage with each other. Part of what was interesting was how they engage with each other, because I think they didn't realize that they could still kind of get in touch with each other. In some ways they could create their own chat boxes and actually we were having a final project that was going to be in smaller groups. And I think over the first couple of weeks of being online, they actually started to think that they could do a project together.
Awesome.
And so the final project actually went into a group project. So
very nice.
There was some kind of interesting, that's kind of organic learning and an adaptation that happened.
And just going with the flow, I think, here I provide the Chronicle of Higher Education has this 10 tips for instructors. Show up to class, be yourself, put yourself in their shoes, which we've talked about, organize course content intuitively, add visuals, again, for those visual learners, explain your expectations. Don't just have that syllabi online, but actually talk them through it. Scaffold learning activities, revisit what you've already discussed. Provide examples. I mean, definitely having those templates, because in the absence of you being there and hands-on, sometimes not knowing, making the class an inviting and pleasant place to be. And that's one of the things I think we all try to do. One of the things I try to do is also speak to this notion of diversity. And I have everybody put up their mood for the day using their screens. And because we do have some of those gaps when we talk about, we don't want people to see where we live. So that becomes sort of a diversity tool. And then, with our last one here is commit to continuous improvement. And I think we've all talked about, hey, we're learning this and we're going through this together. So thank you for sharing each one of those tips. Courtney, I wanted to sort of roll into, as we talk about these strategies and move towards the students, this notion of sort of being flexible. You hit on it ahead of just a little bit ago. But talk to us a little bit about making some of those projects or being that flexible. Do you see yourself rolling some of the transitions that you made into sort of a permanent stake and a permanent class model as you move forward and managing students and helping them engage? Is there anything that you've adopted and taken from this time period that you're gonna keep as you move forward with your class design?
Definitely. There were a couple project management based projects that assignments that I hadn't really had in mind, that really came through that the students, enjoyed more. One of the assignments that I had was really complex, where it took them pretty much the entire semester to complete, and dealing with COVID and some of the challenges that the students were facing technology wise, I had to really compile something that was short and sweet. And typically when I teach online, I use what I have coined the Sesame Street model. The Sesame Street model is quick and fast. 3-minute, kind of like what Brian was saying, the 3 to 5 minute videos, using synchronous and asynchronous style teaching, but also it's voice inflection, it's color, it's music, and all of that in one. And so again, kind of getting back to the nuts and the bolts of what skills do I want those students to leave with, and really getting away with adding, sometimes as professors, we are focused on the robustness of the assignment. Is it hitting on their oral skills? Is it hitting on written skills? Especially in sports management, we're really driven to have these written-based assignments. And so getting back to the core of what skills do I want these kids to take back, and then being in COVID-19, are those skills practical? Can they be utilized in a gamut of fields? Not even saying if the kid decides to leave sport management, can they apply those skills to the next field as well? And so it's just really focusing on that. One of the things that in all of this that I've really been proud of is building that virtual learning internship program. Is it okay to share that, or you want me to hold off on the virtual learning?
Yeah, we'll move into that real quick. I just wanted to also just give a shout out that, even though we talk about things that we as faculty and instructors have to do, we also want to be mindful that we encourage our students to know that they have a stake in this as well. And so
exactly.
Chime in. So we've got these quick 5 tips for us to share. Again, teaching applications. Sport is a vast field. You each come from different disciplines. We each represent something different. And so how do we begin to move those things forward and then start talking about, Courtney, as you just mentioned, and as Jasmine has shared with us here today, learning activities based on reading, things that they can do from a peer evaluation, think, pair, share, quick write, quick draw, 3, 2, 1. All of this information will be available for everyone once the program's over, and you'll have access to it. And so one of the things, I've got these apps here, but I want Courtney and Eli to share this notion of internships How has that transition? I think that's a big thing that we're seeing. Again, my husband overseas in an IOC program. Internship is a big thing for him right now as well. What are you doing? What are some of the challenges right now in creating these practical study applications and in a virtual space?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm extremely excited about was building a virtual learning project-based internship program for Texas Southern, our sport management program. One of the challenges that we face is sport management is physical. The majority of our students were interning in event management-based positions, ticket ops, customer interface-based positions where they're actually hand-in-hand working with the customer. Obviously, again, sports shut down, so the Rockets internships were put on hold. Major League Baseball currently doesn't have any virtual learning, virtually based internships, so we had to find something for those students that needed that understanding that sport management and sport studies both require an internship component for graduation. And so one of the things that we did was we got together and we built this virtual learning based internship. We're going to pilot it this summer. Very, very briefly, what the project is based on is athletic coaches, people in, it's going to cover for sport management, health, and kines majors. And so we have partnered with people in hospitals, a lot of professors, but for the pilot, we're just going to work with TSU athletics. The coaches will be able to upload into Blackboard a project that they're working on. Some of those projects have been social media-based projects. The majority of the projects that the coaches have uploaded so far are dealing with COVID-19. TSU has decided to go back on campus in the fall, so we're going to use a hybrid-based system, but our athletes will return to campus, and so they need to know how to social distance. Also, reacclimating to campus life, reacclimating to be an athlete as well. And so the students will be able to apply to a project and they'll have the entire summer to complete the project in line with that coach. And that coach will serve as what we're titling them as a project mentor. The project mentor will work with them not only through the project, but to provide a little bit of leadership, a little bit of insight into what it means to be a coach, what it means to be a professional in the field. The students are also going to complete some workshop seminars on LinkedIn Learning. And if you're not familiar with LinkedIn Learning, ladies and gentlemen, definitely Google them. LinkedIn Learning is a dynamic site. It used to be called lynda.com a couple years ago, but switched over to LinkedIn Learning. You can go on there and complete courses on everything from Adobe to Python, it's just a gamut of things, leadership classes, technology classes, business classes, creative thinking, so on and so on. And so the students will complete these courses based on the project they select. So say that you do social media, you'll have to do video production, audio, technology, social media basics. They'll complete those courses and at the end actually upload a final project to the class, then allowing the class to learn, in essence, very briefly, what they took the semester to learn. So we're really excited about this. Again, we haven't had a virtual internship program again, so it's going to be want to see where this goes.
Okay, and Eli.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, just a really important time now. The internship opportunities, especially with the grassroots organizations.
Okay.
Because I work a lot kind of with NGOs and organizations that are doing grassroots sport and sport for development, sport and positive youth development. And a lot of them are, the capacity, whether it's furloughing staff or just not having the resources. And so, but also just in terms of the opportunities for internships and for undergraduate students, graduate students. And this is not only in the United States, but also even internationally, whether it's being able to support an organization virtually, being able to provide, whether it's just doing research or being able to do curriculum development or marketing and media. I mean, there's so many different ways that these smaller NGOs worldwide that are doing sport for human rights, sport for development, sport for social change. So those kind of organizations are a great opportunity for internships.
Okay, and I think we have some individuals here that are welcoming, you know, they're trying to match up individuals. I know we at the Institute are looking for interns as well. And so, you know, it's a time to kind of connect with some of our peers here and others to see where they're taking that. The final segment I wanted to go into was really going to hit on Brian, with the work that Brian does and the work that Jasmine do with regard to, we've talked about teaching, we talked about the methods, the strategies, some of the application, but in terms of assessment, that's something that we really have to keep in mind as educators and working in higher ed. Talk to us a little bit about sort of what does that mean from an assessment best practices moving to this virtual space, and how do we begin to look at those standards or, you know, revitalize some of those standards?
Well, Zoom assessment, when we were in person was hard enough as it is. So being online is in a way from each other has been a lot too as well. So the main thing with assessment is we all do it anyways, even within our classrooms as well. And we all want our programs to be well. And so it's just, how are your students performing? Are you in line with, you know, what's expected of them when they graduate and so on? And so it's really looking at it from that way. We have the other side that looks at striving for continuous improvement. And that's what assessment is how are you striving for continuous improvement of your programs, the capabilities of your graduates, and what's happening in those individual classes as they lead on up into getting into graduation. And so that's been a main thing. But with assessment too, every area has their, you know, set of standards. This set of standards I chose to show is called ISTE. It's the International Society for Technology and Education. And this is something that is looked at. There's standards for educators, as you can see there, students, administrators. I got excited when I saw coach for a split second and realized, oh, it was instructional coach. But like I said earlier, it's a recipe, so you can take, I mean, that's what we do in sport anyways. We take a lot of things and adapt it to, you know, the things that we need. But these set of standards are really good because we all have the assumption that students understand technology and they're technologically savvy, which in some cases they are. But when you take those same technological skills and apply it to a professional standpoint, sometimes they really don't have those things. But ISTE is a really good thing because it helps you as the instructor, educator, and to help with your students actually need when it comes to technology. So it's not just, oh, did they have problems uploading things, but other things that you need to focus on too as well. What you're seeing on your screen now is, I borrowed it from, I think, Champlain College, but it's all in Canvas. And I'm happy that we are actually switching over to Canvas so we can have everything kind of in one platform, because I think that's been an issue too as well. But these 10 principles of assessment just kind of outlines a lot of the different things that we said before with clarifying your students what's good performance. So giving them a rubric, you know, if I do this, then I know I'll get this. And so when making it clearer for them, because a lot of our students are still learning how to critically think. So sometimes when we say stuff, they don't automatically get to the conclusions or get to the point that we want them to get to. So having all of those, understanding time and effort is there. Quality feedback, because a lot of times telling them, oh, this was weak, well, they may not understand, okay, why was this argument weak? Well, what was weak about it and how can they fix it? And all of this goes into helping with assessment within your classroom, which also will go into assessment for your programs too as well. And I think I saw a couple of things pop up in the chat.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions out there to you all as panelists to talk a little bit more about the learning platforms that you use. Canvas, Blackboard, I think Brian was trying to get a clarification there. Brian, do you want to go ahead and take the lead on that question to Jen Fry, who's out there? How you doing?
Sure. So to answer like the first one and then this one too, like in our book, there's lots of examples of like how to do assessment with the various instructional strategies. And I'll give another recommendation to another book called 7 Ways of Learning that was co-authored. So it's 7 Ways of Learning by Davis and Arend. And they actually used to be a DU. I never met Jim Davis, but I knew Bridget Arend, know her. I think it's a fantastic book. It's a very theory researched light, but depth. Yeah, 7 Ways of Learning. Yeah. And it's theory researched light, but it's deep. And it's the application of it too. And you can see it. And they talk about it in a instructional design framework of here's what this learning theory kind of was all about and why it's good and what it's used for. And here's ways to assess it too. So they provide you with those guidelines. I created my own kind of spreadsheet of it, and I refer back to it quite often.
Okay.
So I like to use the example. We're talking about it, differentiating instruction or universal design for learning. I use two different examples. If you want to learn how to squat, okay, if you want to learn how to lift weights, back squat, like you can talk about it, you can write about it, you can make a picture, a video, you can do a variety of different things. But at the end of the day, you got to squat.
Right.
Physical demonstration. If that's what you're trying to do, that's what you do. If you're trying to get somebody for right now, I'm teaching our research class, and the major project might be a research paper, a proposal, some sort of research tool. That's what they got to do. And I'll use the different instructional strategies, materials to try to facilitate that goal. But that's where I've got to get them what we're trying to get done explicitly in the class. Online as well, I'll say, like with Canvas and other things, when you go online, if it's asynchronous too, and mindful that when you're not in the classroom, you have to be very detailed, explicit, and offer multiple forms of instruction, because in class there is so much micromanagement, instruction, clarification, questioning in real time that goes on that may not happen. It's usually harder online and asynchronous. So think about those things and work through the questions. I'll tell you another great feature with Canvas, and I've used Canvas, Blackboard, and the other one was, I can't remember if it was D2L or Moodle or one of the things. And I didn't care for that one at all. And then Blackboard was rough when we started using it. Canvas to me is like an Apple product. It's kind of more intuitive. You can drop and drag and click and link things, upload stuff. But it has a nice option for a variety of different rubrics, RUB, And when you create a rubric, I don't, for me, guys, it's more about learning than it is about checking the box and, it's 7 points or 8. Like, this isn't, and really, Jasmine, in a way, like, we're so fortunate because we're not K-12 teachers. Like, we don't have somebody in the state policy saying you have to do exactly this in your lesson plan and this and that. But the rubric, what it does is it offers great expectations and clear advice on what you're looking for across the variety of finished products that you're trying to do. And if you can upload examples of quality across the continuum, students, especially online, love that stuff because and you can save stuff over the years, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to offer people.
And that's one of the things I try to keep those and even set up modules such that students are kind of studying per section. Again, it fills in that notion of, intuitive learning, but it's something that's a structured schedule. They can see those things come together. You can put videos and things and drop in there. And so I think those are some of the great things about these platforms that are coming together and really tapping into, again, your IT people that have set up your Canvas for you, so you can really utilize the robust nature of it. Has been exciting. Yeah. So with regard to this notion of teaching in a space, one of the things I also want to get at, and Jasmine, thank you for sharing the important information with regards to assessment. In all of this too, we'd still kind of come back to the student. So could you talk to us a little bit about how you've worked with advising students in this process? We're at the end of the semester. Some of us, like Courtney said, are going to be doing a hybrid advisement. We're going to be virtual. We've got student athletes. How have you handled this issue of advisement, organizing classes, talking to them about internships, and just engagement and success as they continue to matriculate through their respective programs?
Well, so with I not always kind of advise, because I explained to my students too, advising is not just you registering for classes. I was like, advising is way more than that and goes into, what are you going to do, helping to explore career opportunities and so on, just to help you guide you along your way. So between Zoom and DocuSign have been my favorite thing so far. I liked Moodle because I always, even though I mainly taught face-to-face, I always had enough resources. And so they were used to going back to that. like I said before, we're switching over to Canvas. I'm starting to like it, starting to see the benefits of it. But with advising, other things that I've used is the Remind app. We have that for our students too as well. And like I said, I also opened up another Instagram account that was mainly for them too. So it's the same thing too with teaching. It's just letting them know it's okay. It's not really a new process. It's just a new method of us, going through this advisement process. So it has definitely had its challenges because, as Brian said earlier, a lot of that goes in face-to-face, the questioning and, getting all of that out the way has been now stretched over emails and Remind and text messages and so on. And so that has been a huge task. The other part of it is that we have a lot of students that have decided to go into work and, looked at it as an opportunity, whether they really need to or not, but looked at it as an opportunity to work. And so that has also been a challenge with, if I set up Zoom times and then now you sending me a message at 9 p.m. at night. So one thing that I did is that I tried to split up my hours. And so I had like a 9 to 12, like a morning shift, and then like a 9 to 12 p.m. night shift, which I know a lot of the students appreciated too as well, because if they weren't up super early, like at 8 o'clock in the morning, or if they had to work or whatever, they still had kind of like that midnight breakfast advising period that we had going on. So those were things I was still flexible, but still also working with them and understanding that things don't happen on your own time. And just, why I'm going through all of this, especially I had a student's mom that was on, she was like, thank you so much for going off on them that way. And I was just like, well, we're also preparing you for life. And so, it's cool if you're making a grade, whatever, but how are you going to function in life? And so that's kind of my main focus thing too, as well, is that I'm training you to be a professional, but I'm also training you to function in life.
Thank you for that. We got a great question, which I'm glad. Thank you, Clayton, for bringing this question, because we're all diversity people. But he wants to hear a little bit of our thoughts on diversity, inclusion, equity in the online classroom. I know we spoke a little bit of using VARC as one of those tools, but again, how do we address some of the other challenges that our students are facing based on their respective demographic, learning, ability, race issues as well. So we could give some insight to a great question that we've had from our attendees.
One thing I'll just say really quickly, I never thought about having closed captioning on things that I would send out to as well. And so that was another thing for me to make sure that, because even though it may have been clear for me, to see and hear, depending on what device someone had, they may not have that same clarity. So that was one thing that I tried to look for, any videos that I would post up that would have closed captioning on there, or find a way to actually ensure that closed captioning was along with it.
And even your presentations, real quick, if you use Google Slides, they are able to close caption for you as you speak. So just another insight there. Other diversity and inclusion methods. Again, I talked about the backdrop before, just to be mindful of everyone's situation. But what about recording? Talk to me about some other strategies that you use with regards to diversity, inclusion, and equity in the classroom online.
One of the things that I do is I'm very aware of pictures that I use. Words that I'm using, making sure that they're not restrictive. I noticed when I first started working, there was a lot of she, her being used, just really trying to, especially being in sports, just really trying to push that gender, notion. But again, just making sure that, the wording that I'm using, it's also been changing a little bit and understanding dialect, being originally from Michigan, now teaching in Texas. I remember one time in class, I gave an analogy and I was like, yeah, she was drinking pop. And my students were like, she was drinking what? What's pop? Are you drinking soda? And so just, again, being aware of some of those language barriers, but again, teaching in those cultural classes, and again, being African-American females, realizing that a lot of my marginalization was around the voice of a Black female. And so again, being able to step back and realize that, maybe I need to broaden that a little bit, add a little bit about other countries, add a little bit about other ethnicities, other genders as well. One of the things that I've really been pushing now myself to do, which is been rather challenging because it's really not my expertise, but it's focusing on age as well. Pulling in more with disability too. And so just making sure those courses teach a gamut of things and not focusing so much maybe on where my research is.
All right, thank you. Eli, with the work.
Yeah, I would just add that, especially around disability and students with disabilities, oftentimes just asking, students to be able to, especially in the new environment we're in, and just many people, young people with disabilities are very comfortable with new technologies and adapting and habit. So actually working from or being able to be at home helps them because they have the setups and so forth. But at the same time, some of the different learning styles and learning disabilities or physical disabilities or sensory, just being able to know what their needs are and what will help them, I think is really useful. And then I guess I've just been really interested, just because I think it is a really big question, particularly in an international context of just the broadbands and the access to high-speed internet and the ability to make sure that everyone can, maybe people do have iPhones and can join to some extent, but the capacity to really be in a safe and supportive and the most effective and efficient environment. Because I know that, many households here around the world, the speed of the internet is not at the capacity of what's needed. And so that brings in the socioeconomic and all sorts of other questions. Because I do think there is an element of privilege that we're dealing with in these conversations. And so trying to integrate that a bit.
Right. Brian. You gave some good information with regards to being mindful of time zones people are in. As I've been counting backwards and forwards to remember where I'm at and where I teach and where I'm currently staying. So those have been some challenges, but yes, other.
We've got students actually in probably, I think now about 5 different countries throughout all the time zones in the U.S. And so we just, we have it in our syllabus of how we start and stop the day and the week. But the reality is, like, if somebody submits something, the due date is 11:59 and they submit it at 12:05 a.m. or even 3 a.m., I don't care. Like, it's not a problem, and it's not like days late and everything's late. We'll address that stuff, but like, give people a break, and like trying to calculate the times, and stuff happens. And the online environment, with adults too, is just different.
Yes.
It's just a different space. And, all these people, especially as old coach, right, will make these conclusions. Well, if you don't get this in on time, you're not going to be successful in life, and your kids will grow up ugly and they'll be failures too.
Oh.
That's how it goes. It's just nonsense. And you guys know too, you're in faculty meetings. Faculty are the worst about deadlines and everything. They talk out both sides of their mouth. So let the students, not slide, but accommodate and be understanding with that. I'll just say regarding diversity too, it's interesting to hear Courtney say those things, because one of the things I look at my research class and I go, I need to actually make sure I'm intentionally including more like Black feminist thought, right? Because I don't want to be like, okay, here's our experimental designs and generic qualitative research. There are these other things. And we actually had a student just leave our program after taking I did such a good job in my sociology of coaching class that she withdrew, and she's applied now for a PhD program in like diversity higher ed. And I'm thrilled. I'm going to write a letter of recommendation. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. You do that, and students are like, this is my voice. Now I find something, and I intentionally teach a variety of perspectives in the research class so they can see that stuff.
And I'll add one more thing before we depart and talk about just our final 2 thoughts and takeaways we want people to have. But just a quick aside, one of the things I do to be mindful of kind of diversity and equity, you've talked about all of the other wonderful aspects, but I also just being mindful of the time period. So instead of an assignment that would typically probably face-to-face, we can do this in 1 week, I'm giving you 2 weeks to do it. So because again, if we're dealing with family dynamics, we don't always know what others are having to manage and what's in their household, who's in their household, and when they may find the time to get the assignment done that they definitely want. So, you know, those are some things to definitely to consider as you are working your planning. So thank you so much for those questions. Wanted to get to a last couple of pieces of business. We talked about, again, the advisement, continuing to work with those students. But as we begin to come to a close, I know we're drawing near on our time, want you all to definitely chime into the Institute. We're definitely looking for interns. We will have some follow-up to this conversation as it's one that's definitely growing. As you see, we have a few of our faculty affiliates with us today. Some of them are online, so how are you doing out there in the virtual space? But to continue this conversation, and we will be putting together some documentation, so the resources that we talked about, the apps, the platforms, the best practices, articles, as we have many editors with us today, will be shared with you. So again, chime into SJSU Institute for the Study of Sports, Society, and Social Change to look into the dialogue, definitely to provide any sort of support that you can so we can continue these initiatives that we have here today. And look to our library, visit our Dr. Harry Edwards collection, and learn more about all the wonderful work that is going on here and beyond. So final thoughts I want to get from each of you. Give us a final 1 or 2 thoughts in a minute or two of what you want individuals to take away from today's conversation.
I'll start off as an advocate for online education in sport management. One of the things that I have preached to my colleagues is that our field goes hand in hand with online education. Understanding that the majority of us that are in this space right now are faculty, I would like to speak to everybody and say, really, really help us to add to the robustness of online education. So many of our colleagues are against online education because they think it's easy. They think the testing doesn't have the rigor that maybe the face-to-face classes have. And so as we go into this space where a lot of us are having to teach online, really make that a great experience for those students. Don't make it easy, you know, really add that depth that you would do in those online classes and really help to advocate for online education as a vehicle for, especially in sport management, for those kids to be able to stay in their professional careers and get an education as well.
I would also just add that online is different from face-to-face. And so if we just accept that fact, but it doesn't mean that, as Courtney stated earlier, that the quality doesn't have to be there. And so for the quality to be there, it's going to take a level of strategy. So you have to strategize a bit. And the best strategy isn't just throwing everything that has to do with your topic online and just assuming people are going to understand. So I just say one just accepts that it's not the same, but both can have quality. And that just strategize and just kind of focus on what you want your students to get out of their online virtual experience with you.
And I'll just add that the learning there's so much great potential with this platform. It's such an innovative opportunity here in this transition in this changing time. And so I think there's just so much that can be learned and kind of grow together, the sport management field, the sports studies field, to really, you know, to really continue to further what we're doing, develop those best practices, and so forth. I think just a really interesting time and a really unique time for growth and learning for everybody, and the students, the faculty, the practitioners. You know, all of us are kind of learning through this, and I think there's many of us that are sort of like zoomed out, you know, but at the same time, it's also about how do we find ways, how do we be creative, how do we have some of these best practices. And so that's why I'm really excited about this conversation, and you know, thanks so much for having it, because I think it's really essential that we're having these conversations now.
Thank you. I know we've had a lot of conversations in-house and separate, so it was one that we really wanted to bring to the fore. So I thank you. Brian, final thoughts, takeaways from today's conversation.
I think you made me not do. I had something, and then you sparked another thing. There was one that you sparked earlier too. It's when you're designing online, try to estimate especially if it's not synchronous, like somebody's just in for an hour and then they leave, and that's your class.
Right.
But try to estimate how much time it would take to read this page. And there's some devices now, including Microsoft, that have some built-in tools that you can use to estimate those things, just like you see on the news articles before you read them. So you got an activity, a discussion board, an assignment, you got to read an article, a chapter, try to actually sit down and kind of estimate that. And you realize, oh, like, you know, and there's a range, but it might, you might be assigning 12 hours worth of work for a 1-credit class, and you got a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So prioritize, you know, what's essential that they must do or like high priority versus here's some other nice things I'm going to provide them because I have this platform now. I can give you everything I know about this topic,
Right.
but it's not essential. So that was the one point, is estimating the time and in credit hour alignment. But then you sparked the idea of, you know, we're talking about these things now, and we should always be talking about these things.
Exactly.
And that reflects, right, I think, larger social problems like capitalism and the publish and perish research one grant active universities. And, you know, if you don't do those things, then you're a bad faculty. And universities have not done a great job often with preparing faculty and graduate students to teach. So now is a great time to bring up some of these things and get folks off of our backs as well, so we can do the job of teaching well. And the organizations and everybody else support that, not just highlighting research and grant people. And that's great, and I do that too. But you know, all of us in organizations could be doing more around helping teachers, which all of us and more of us do high priority with that.
Right. Well, and I think what all of you have said has been wonderful. I'll add from my perspective that you see I have these great people joining me today. Utilize these individuals as well as others to come in and guest lecture for your class. Oftentimes we don't have budgets to bring people in. We can now create perhaps speaker series and utilize this as a platform to bring together these great minds that are doing some wonderful things. And even as Eli alluded to, from a global perspective, we can connect with people in other countries and other organizations that can come in and speak to our students in this new space. So take advantage of things that we have in front of us. It's an opportunity now for us to learn and grow together. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Dr. Courtney Flowers from Texas Southern University, Dr. Eli Wolff from the Power Sports Lab, Dr. Brian Gearity, Director and Assistant Professor of Fitness and Coaching and Strength and Conditioning and everything, right, from University of Denver, as well as Dr. Jasmine Hamilton, who's a professor at Prairie A&M University. You can see their emails below as well as their Twitter handles. And look them up, find them, get their information, and bring some of the things that we talked about today, hopefully, to your class in the future. So we thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.